people wouldn't be trying to take your vote away so hard if it actually did not matter.
Welcome back to In the Meanwhile. I'm Marcus Harrison Green.
And I'm Nora Kenworthy. Marcus, do you think that Santa forgot to bring Donnie all the toys that he asked for Christmas or something? Because this national nightmare feels a whole lot like a tyrant's mommy doesn't love me meltdown this week.
Well, I would say he should definitely be on the naughty list and shouldn't have got anything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, maybe that's where the tantrum comes from. I don't know. But look, in case listeners, you are under a rock, and in that case, honestly, I envy you. The Trump
Living your best
administration,
life, probably.
yes. What do they say? Just it's either delirium or just a whole sort of force field of just obliviousness is would be preferred at this moment. But anyhow, the Trump administration maybe shook off its Mar-a-Lago induced New Year's hangovers and decided to kidnap another country's president, and then to top it off, said it was going to be running that country. And then there's more. Threatened to invade 6 other countries. I believe a couple of them we are actually are our NATO allies as
Yeah.
well. So
And that was by like Tuesday.
yeah, that was yeah. It may have changed by the time you hear this podcast. It might be up to double digits. I don't know, but
I mean, honestly, can we just stop the scroll right there this week? It's too much. I heard that part of the reason that Trump pushed for kidnapping Maduro in Venezuela is that he saw videos of him dancing and celebrating at anti-American protests, and Trump saw that and like threw his little FIFA peace prize across the room like a toddler throws its toys. Because God forbid people celebrate or laugh at America right now. I mean, what good is being the world's policeman if you don't get to be taken seriously by the entire world? I mean, that'll show him, Donnie.
oh god, yeah. And Nora, why wouldn't people take the administration seriously, particularly when they are running high security operations via drunken signal chats and whatever that pillow fort situation room was that they set up in Mar-a-Lago for this mission? Like, did you see that, Nora? Like, I
Yes.
mean, I remember when Obama, went and got, he killed Osama bin Laden, and they're like all in an actual situation room. It looks very serious. They look very, I mean, regardless of what, whatever you thought of that administration, it looks like they actually know what the hell they're doing. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. Like the gauzy kind of see through black curtains. And also, like, my favorite part was the projection screen in the background showing what looks like a search for Venezuela on X. Like, did we hit the news yet, guys, with our kidnapping? Yeah. Also, in this week's news dump, and I do think we mean the word dump,
Yes.
we have Senator Fetterman referring to Venezuelans on Fox News as Venezuelans. I I am starting to wonder how many people who support this administration could even find Venezuela on a map at this point.
I mean, how many people even know it's, part of Latin America? I mean, I gotta say, who needs AI slop when it's just the real world slop is just like coming, by the metric ton these days, Nora. So, oh my lord. Well, we do know that U.S. oil companies knew about this operation way before Congress because they were informed about this operation in Caracas before anyone else. So I mean, this just seems to be neo-colonialism that is very obvious and very stupid. And
Kinda
yeah,
how it
I
always has been, but, like, special edition.
yeah, I mean, it ratchets up the stupidity though, and the blatantness, right? Which is why I gotta say, in some ways, it is somewhat refreshing that Trump was just like being honest about that we're there to get the oil, like as opposed to just was it George W. Bush? We went to Iraq
The
with this is
WMDs.
the WMDs, and we're here to promote democracy. Trump's like, no, we want the oil. We're going to run it. Yeah, and that's going to be that. So, any more questions? No, let's go.
I feel like we are the generation raised on, like, pointless oil wars from the US. I
My
mean,
God, yeah.
I can now relive in my mind multiple scenes of watching the US invade other countries on broadcast TV, and wondering what the hell we're doing in another country.
Yes, and I mean, it should be stated, right? I mean, we are still paying for George W. Bush's Iraq War
Yes.
exploits, and here's the thing, like, it just needs to be reiterated. I know it's been said repeatedly through at least, if you're on Blue Sky and various other places that I hang out on the internet. Um, most Americans right now, they're still talking about affordability, right? They're
Yeah.
still talking about how can we survive here in late stage capitalism when you can barely, afford a carton of eggs.
Yes.
And I will tell you this, to have these exploits over in another country, I mean, it is it is opportunity cost in the sense of like the money is not finite, right? And so what we are spending on this exploit and these potential other exploits, I believe, as of at least as of when we're recording this podcast, the Trump administration says it has not ruled out applying military force to potentially, God, for lack of a better term, capture Greenland. So I mean, what do
Yeah,
you
we're
think?
talking hemispheric war now, so
Yes,
that's fun.
right? Where do you think those resources are going to be deployed there, as opposed to being deployed where they should be, and that is domestically on schools, on food, on any and everything except wars in foreign countries.
Yeah,
So, anyhow,
agreed. Yeah, we're about to start the legislative session here in Washington State with a massive budget crisis that is being made worse every day by federal cuts to our budget. Everyone is talking about how we can't backfill for the federal government, even if we had the political will to do so. And, Trump is saying, like, well, the oil companies are going to get fully reimbursed. What does that even mean?
I, I, yeah, we.
Cool.
This is too
Good
much
for
to.
them.
This is a little too much to get into in terms of like the history of American interference in Venezuela. I would just say like go, if you can go and listeners go look up like the latest episode of American Prestige. I thought they did a really excellent job of looking into of essentially exploring and unpacking the history of American influence in Venezuela. Let's just say, I think I think it's a wash in terms of who owes who at this point. I think we're good. That being said, just another touchstone on Venezuela while we are on it is that I will tell you,
While we're complaining,
yeah,
while
we continue to rant and on how our how this administration is just destroying all types of goodwill, the goodwill that we had left,
yeah.
with the this American enterprise here. But oh Jesus, yeah, I
Well,
mean, yeah.
while we give our listeners some time to add, democracy and human rights to their little, like, 2025 memorial shrines, I do think that you and I might have some apologizing and ritual cleansing to do of our own. Unfortunately, Marcus, as
Yes.
recently as last week when we were recapping last year,
Mhm.
these words actually came out of your mouth. You said,
But this year could have been worse, Nora.
"And
For the most part, there were not, I don't know, the imperial marches through cities as I thought. Yeah, I the caveat I guess is American cities maybe, I don't know. Like I just and grant you it did happen in, 2026, not
Ooh,
2025. I didn't realize that 2025 was going to be the reprieve for us and
I
not, 2026. That being said, yeah, it I think I
2026 heard that dare,
I
and,
it
like."
certainly did. Certainly did. I will just say nothing in the future, like nothing at all in the future that in any way is optimistic about anything. So yeah, my
Well, it's
bad,
fair.
y'all.
I
My
ruined the
bad.
Mariners' chance at the World Series by speaking too soon on our show about that, so it's only fair that we blame, like, World War III on you.
That is true. And just I know that there are some Seahawks fans probably listening that are getting a
We are
little
not talking about the
antsy.
Seahawks,
We will
Mark.
not talk about the Seahawks and their potential chances at the Super
Don't
Bowl.
say
So
it.
hold, so we'll hold there. We'll hold there on that. Anyway.
No, in all seriousness, if you are feeling like you have aged a decade in the first week of January and you are counting the days until the next election, we are right there with you. It has been a week.
Jesus, it's only January. Yeah.
Still.
Wow. Yeah, Nora, I don't think I didn't sign up for this. I don't think anybody else signed up for this.
Well,
Well,
half of voters did, but
that is true. That is true. But apparently, Nora, even they are balking at what Trump is doing in Venezuela. There was a recent Washington Post poll. Yeah, I get it. I know it's the Post, whatever. But it did find that 94% of Americans believe that it should be the Venezuelan people making decisions about their future leadership and not the US. Imagine that.
I mean, 94% is a lot of agreement for the United States right now. Like, I'm not even sure we agree that much on, like, pasteurizing milk at this point.
Yeah, I think that's maybe 50-50 and probably shouldn't be. But anyway, I will say though, when you talk about that 94%, I mean, what is the other 6% doing? Did they just wake up and didn't get news alerts, or do they have Newsmax on morning until night? I mean, like what?
I mean,
Yeah,
honestly, if that's you, hats off to your incredibly healthy media boundaries. The rest of us were up at 5 a.m. on a Sunday morning during the holidays, like, shaking our phones like a magic 8 ball, trying to hope to get different answers.
yeah. No, sadly, my phone does not work that way, and neither do our politics. We don't just get to cross our fingers and hope for a different outcome as much as I wish that was the case. Which is why, in the most tumultuous of weeks, and this is definitely up there, I am so glad for this week's conversation.
Agreed. For the past couple of weeks, we've been sort of ushering in the new year by looking back and, more importantly, ahead to the political organizing that is happening all around us to manifest the kinds of futures that we actually want to live in without any magic 8 balls required. This week, we continue that series of conversations with a look at the national fight for voting rights. We're joined by Hannah Freed, my good friend and also CEO of All Voting is Local, who shares with us how organizers and communities are doubling down on the incredibly difficult and essential work of ensuring we all can vote easily and safely in the next elections.
This conversation offers pragmatic hope in many different forms, reminding us of how important voting is to all Americans and how much long, hard work has gone into continuing to protect our voting rights.
So it's a particular joy to introduce Hannah Freed, the co founder and CEO of All Voting is Local and AVL Action. Hannah has served previously as the National Director and Deputy General Counsel for Voter Protection on Hillary Clinton's presidential campaign. She also helped lead voter protection efforts in the 2012 and 2008 Obama campaigns and served as Deputy Director and Deputy Counsel for Voting Protection at the Democratic National Committee from 2009 to 2012. She's a frequent commentator on voting rights and democracy issues, sharing her voice with outlets including The Washington Post, The New York Times, The New Yorker, The Atlantic, MSNBC, Forbes, and others. Freed is also a 2025 Elevate Prize winner, and Time last year in 2025 included her on its Time 100 Next list of leaders shaping the future. Hannah, thank you so much for being with us today. It's really great to chat with you.
Thank you guys for having me. I am in my last probably 2 hours of working in 2025, and no one I would like to spend it more with than my old friend Nora and my new friend Marcus.
Well, we
Awesome.
are honored that we are your last hours of work
Very much
before a
so.
well-deserved
Yes.
vacation. We're really excited to talk to you. We've been having a series of conversations around elections and community organizing and the kind of state of politics in the moment. And we wanted to chat with you, especially because of the work that All Voting is Local has been doing on the ground across the U.S. to expand and secure the vote for Americans, particularly for Black, Brown, Native American, and other historically excluded communities. Can you walk us through a little bit of how you actually do that work? This is not easy stuff to do, and it's really impressive work that you're doing right now.
Thank you. So, what it really comes down to is our ground game. We work in 8 states, and we have staff in those states, from those states, of the communities that we work in and serve, and we think about the fight for voting rights as being a year-round fight. You cannot just think about elections right before people are going to cast their ballot in a presidential election year. The business of running elections is year-round work, and so we are meeting with election officials. We are connecting with communities who need more access to the ballot, and that is not something you can do. That's not a relationship you can build. That's not the kind of trust you need to be able to move the needle is trust that you have to spend years sometimes building in communities, especially communities that have been cut off from the ballot for so long, and so we work by in these communities, we call on election officials to, for example, add a voting location where a community has been desperately needing one for years so that voters don't have to travel an hour to vote. And sometimes there are resource constraints, sometimes there are practical constraints. And so you really got to meet election officials where they are, help them understand why this is so needed, and then help them address whatever the blockers might be so that they can get that voting location where it needs to be. That serves everybody's purpose, that works for everybody, and it's really about figuring out, okay, how do we get to that? How do we get to that yes? How do we get to that solution?
Awesome. Well, Hannah, it's such a pleasure to meet you again. And I don't know, just whether it's places like California where we see what they're doing with, their I guess map that they put to voters, or
Or
even what
redistricting.
we've seen go on in a red state like Indiana, where they've went ahead and declined to farther gerrymander their state. It seems that voting rights are just more important than ever, wherever you might go. And it seems like so many states and municipalities are facing threats with each passing year. And so I want to ask you, as you head into the midterms here, where is All Voting is Local focusing its efforts, both defensively and offensively?
Yeah. You know, I'll start maybe a little bit with thinking about, how does this current fight fit into the historical fight? And, I mean, look, I've been doing this work for pushing 2 decades. And I'd be the first to tell you the fight looks different than what I thought we were gonna be working on. Attacks on election systems, efforts to throw out validly cast ballots at, an enormous scale, challenging millions of voters' eligibility to vote. I mean, these are new challenges, right? I mean, the White House, right, is trying to take away people's right to vote. Um, but in a lot of ways, the fight isn't that new. I mean, we've been fighting this fight as a country for 250 years. We built our election systems to keep people out. I mean, literally, literally, if you were a white male landowner, you could vote. If you were anybody else, yeah, see ya. And we've had some version of that up until the 60s. And so, for us, in a lot of ways, we really think about the work that we do in the context of that long arc and remind ourselves, and frankly, because in a way, it's a little bit of a comfort to know, hey, we've fought some pretty tough fights before as a country, and we've come out on the right side of that issue before, and we can do it again. Okay, but to answer your question more specifically, I think some of the big issues right now that we got to be thinking about, redistricting is a big one, right? Any effort to kind of change the rules of the game midstream, that's kind of what we're seeing in a lot of places right now. That's something that should always send up your antennae, because you wanna be, if anybody's trying to change the rules in the m when people are voting, in the midway through voting, you gotta say, "Okay, something is up here." That person is probably trying to make a decision for their own political gain. But that's not just true with redistricting. I mean, you know, query the sort of political value of this, but we've heard the president of the United States say he's gonna ban vote by mail, which he cannot do, right? But 47 million people voted by mail in 2024. 47 million people. That's rural voters who can't get to a voting location. That's urban voters working 3 jobs. That could be military voters and their dependents living overseas, right? That's a lot of people. So we're really focusing in on where there are efforts to restrict voting access that could have significant impact on a significant number of people. That's always a big driver for us. And of course, thinking about the communities that we serve. Not for nothing, these efforts now to require citizenship, proof of citizenship when you go to vote. There's a federal bill that would require that. There are state level bills that would require people to show a passport or a birth certificate to register to vote. That is a huge burden for Americans, 69 million married women who may not have access to a birth certificate that matches their current married name, right? But you also have to think about it in the context of anti-immigrant sentiment all across this country and the ugliness of that. So voting is very much an issue that ties into broader sort of social sentiment and political wins. And we're very cognizant of that and the impact that not only voting changes, but also a broader environment has on the communities that we're serving.
100%. And yeah, thank you for stating that so with such moral clarity. Um, I want to I want to pick up on one of the things that you mentioned, which actually weighs heavily on us here in Washington State, which is mail-in ballots. We have a really beloved mail-in ballot system in Washington State. It's universal. It's great. The Trump administration has obviously made it clear that they want to dismantle those types of voting systems. And so, can you walk us through what does the kind of offense or defense against those kinds of policy threats look like, and how can listeners in places like Washington support those efforts, even if Washington is not one of the places where you have a ground game?
Yeah. One of the biggest things that we in our pro democracy movement have going for us is that Americans like being able to vote and they like options in how they do it. There's a real big tent of people who want to be able to vote in the way that it works for them. We did this study a couple years ago at All Voting is Local that found that 83% of Americans think that voting should be safe and accessible because it's a fundamental right and responsibility. That 47 million people who voted by mail in 2024 included Republicans, Democrats, independents, young people, older people, voters with disabilities, military voters, just about everybody you can imagine. And that's the thing about these restrictions and about the ability to advance progress, right? Which I can talk about in a minute. We've certainly seen that too, is that these changes impact real people and their real lives. They impact somebody that you know, they impact somebody that you love. Maybe it's you, maybe it's your mom, maybe it's your best friend, maybe it's your spouse, right? There is somebody in your life who is going to have their ability to vote changed by these policies. And that I think is truly the greatest pathway that we have to get out of this moment of threat is to really help people understand, hey, this change, this rule, this thing that might sound real technical, abstract, is actually about you. It is about your community. It is about people in your life. And so that is how you can build a true movement and coalition to not only stop attacks on voting rights and attacks on our elections, but actually to advance progress. Voters in Michigan just a few years ago passed huge sweeping changes that expanded access to registration and vote counting, protected certification of elections, right? Voters in Ohio a couple of years ago voted down a constitutional amendment that would have raised the threshold for them, for Ohioans to be able to make changes to their constitution. It would have raised it to a supermajority. And Ohioans were like, absolutely not. That is not for us. And in each of these cases, the way that we saw that victory happen was a realization that there's actually a lot of commonality when it comes down to choices and options and being able to vote. People want to be able to vote. And that's the thing that we always have to remind ourselves in any one of these individual policy fights, no matter how technical, no matter how dry, it's about real people and it's about you.
Yeah, I mean, with all the polarization and hyperpolarization that sort of, particularly folks in the industry that I'm in the media, always sort of, evoke here in this country, it is sort of heartening to know that one of the things that we're not really polarized on is voting rights. It's even though that may be a extreme misconception that folks have. Um, that being said, Hannah, a few weeks ago, Jack Smith, the former Justice Department special counsel, he told lawmakers in a closed door interview that his team of investigators had developed proof beyond a reasonable doubt that President Trump had criminally conspired to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Um, of course, he wasn't able to prosecute that case due to the Trump winning the 2024 presidency. But I mean, I want to ask you, when you hear stories like that, obviously, uh, how are you able to sort of balance your focus between preparing for the worst case scenarios of election subversion, such as uh, that committed by the president, and doing the everyday on the groundwork of securing the vote?
Yeah. You know, I think part of it is that so much of election subversion doesn't look like one big moment. Certainly, there are examples of outlier examples. You just described one, right? But most of the efforts to subvert elections come in the form of a really mechanical, technical change, right? It's gonna look like a new restriction on vote by mail. It's gonna look like, um, uh, requiring people to provide proof of citizenship before they can register to vote. It's gonna look like an election official in a big county or a small one in Arizona or Nevada or California saying, "I'm not sure that I can certify these election results. I need more time." You don't need more time. It is the law that you certify, right? But it's not a big red line. It's it's gonna look subtle. And so for us, the way that we think about our work is to focus on those subtle moments, those smaller moments, both because, stripping away people's ability to vote by mail, making it harder for them to vote early in person, can't go to the polls on election day, you wanna go beforehand. Those cut people off from their ability to register and vote, particularly in the communities that we serve. And in the long run, they can be used to subvert election results. And so for us, it's not so binary, right? We're not looking for that one big moment. We're focusing on those small ones so that we can make sure at every turn that we're opening the door for people to be able to register and to vote and to have their vote count. And it's through that that we keep our focus on both the short and the long term and make real change for people. Maybe that big moment comes again, maybe it doesn't. But we know every day we're moving the needle for more access for Americans.
I think that's a really powerful way of approaching that's very people-centered, and that seems like kind of the heart of a lot of your work. We're I'm thinking of, an Atlantic article that you were recently quoted in under the, like, very ominous headline of, like, "Donald Trump's plan to subvert the midterms is already underway." I mean, we are constantly being told about democracy under threat in pretty abstract terms. But I think the work that you all are doing is confronting it in these really pragmatic person-to-person terms. And so what does that actually look like? I mean, we've had some examples here, but what would maybe our listeners be surprised to learn about where the barriers are right now and where the kind of like threat to the norms or the practices of democracy is happening?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing that might be surprising is how much power people in communities have to protect their own vote. A lot of the work that I'm describing, all of the work that I'm describing, we don't it's not like an all voting is local staffer is going into this meeting room with some election officials and being like, "Let me tell you how it's done, guys." No way, right? No way. It's in partnership with election officials, right, who are part of your community. It's in partnership with residents of a community, people who live there, right? In Georgia in 2024, when Georgia was trying to change last minute, their state board of elections was trying to change the rules around vote counting and certification in the months leading up to the election, the weeks leading up to the election, hundreds of Georgians packed the state board of elections room and said, "Hey, you gotta count our votes," right? When Washoe County, Nevada in 2022 in the primaries tried not to certify election results, you know who it was who said, "Hey, you gotta count our vote?" It was people. It was people in those communities. that is the thing that I think is so extraordinary about this work, is that every single day, people are going to their election officials in their communities and saying, "You gotta protect the vote of the people who live here." When we had legislatures right now have been meeting all year to take up all kinds of issues, some of them expanding voter access. We had huge victories in Nevada for access to the ballot for tribal residents, tribal members, when there were efforts to pass citizenship, proof of citizenship requirements in Michigan, right? It is people from those communities who are going to these Board of Elections meetings, going to their state legislatures and saying, make it so that people here can vote. And I think that is the story that sometimes gets lost. We hear about the litigation, we hear about the Supreme Court, but it is people protecting their own vote that is, I mean, it's honestly the best part of this job, is to see that happen is so moving and so powerful, and it's so real. It is actually the thing. It is that people power that is making the difference in a moment when, frankly, we cannot count on the federal government to protect the right to vote. Quite the opposite. The courts, let's see, right? Congress, come on. But it's people who are protecting their own vote and that of their communities. That's what you can count on right now.
Mm. Well, I'll say, like, speaking of an industry that I think needs to step up, in your opinion, what does mainstream media still tend to get wrong when covering voting rights, especially in the rush to appear balanced? And yes, I'm talking to you in the sort of the shadow of the recent drama that's been going on at CBS News. So, yeah, I'm just curious of your answer to this one.
Yeah, I think what sometimes gets lost, it is, I think, really easy to fall into this, like, there's 2 sides and they want 2 diametrically opposed things and, like, never the twain shall meet, you know? But it's not actually like that out there. I mean, I mentioned already, this study that we did that found that Americans across political parties think that voting should be safe and accessible. There's that, right? But also, like, I mean, look, what's past is past, I suppose. But I am old enough to remember a time when Congress nearly unanimously reauthorized the Voting Rights Act, and George W. Bush signed it into law. It's not that long ago. Like, that sort of that history is like, I mean, look, the last 5 years have blown out of the water basically anything that we came to expect as a norm, don't get me wrong, but that's still out there in our recent history. And I think that when we think about examples like what I mentioned in Ohio, right? Like what I mentioned in Michigan, yeah, sure. Washington, I mean, I live in Washington, D.C., so when I say Washington, I'm not referring to the people who live here, but there are 700,000 of us living here. I'm talking about, Congress, I'm talking about the White House. What's going on there is not necessarily what's happening out in the field, happening out in the streets, happening out in the states, right? There is actually a lot of commonality that Americans have on their ability to register and to vote and to be sure that their votes are gonna count. And that don't fall into that trap of we've got, 2 Americas, we've got 2 different sides. That's not the case here. And I think when we start to oversimplify the story, we lose sight of the real experience that real people are having. And real people, guess what? Want to be able to vote and know that that vote is going to get counted.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel like one of the things that has fundamentally shifted over the last 5 to 10 years, and I will say that this is like a parallel shift to my own field of public health, is the rampant disinformation and denialism that now surrounds a lot of election cycles. It really has become a feature rather than a flaw of how we collectively experience, you know, even the most basic results. And so what can be done now and looking towards the midterms to improve trust in elections and like reduce these cycles of disinformation that we understand you have to address it, but long before election day actually comes
Yeah.
around.
Yeah. It's a couple things I would say about this. The first is that you've got election systems and the way that they actually work. And the second is what people think about how they actually work. And on the first, the very good news is that our election systems have never been more secure and reliable, right? Something like 98% of Americans vote on a paper ballot, right? So your ballot, the vote you cast can be verified, right? That should bring people a lot of reassurance. And it wasn't always that way. This We've made enormous gains in the past even 5 years, but definitely 10, 20, to ensure that our election systems are safe and reliable and accessible. There's also
Sort of like our
so
vaccine system?
sort of, Nora, sort of, you might say that. And, this is the thing too, actually, that probably is a fair parallel, is there's so much that most of us are not gonna see that ensures the reliability of our election systems. The numerous checks that election officials do both pre and post-election to make sure that the vote you cast is gonna match the vote that's counted, right? To make sure that the tallies overall align, to make sure that our machines are calibrated correctly so they're recording everything right. I mean, there's some stuff you see, and there's a whole bunch you don't see, and that should bring us all a lot of comfort. The second is about what information people are receiving. And part of what we do is make sure that trusted messengers, right? That might be your pastor, it might be your teacher, it might be an election official. It's probably an elected official who's going up on the news. Let's make sure they have good information so that the information they're conveying to communities, to people, to voters about election systems is accurate, right? Make sure part of what we do is make sure election officials have the resources to do that kind of public engagement so they can say, hey, are you curious about how our voting machines work? Let's tell you. Are you wondering when your ballot is due? Let's tell you. It takes money and it takes time to get that message out into the public, but it's vital that people are getting good information. And the thing I'll say too, and I'll say this to your listeners really especially, is combating disinformation is something that we all can be doing. You are someone's trusted messenger. Every single one of us, whether it's a sibling, a friend, your cousin, a colleague, someone is looking to you to give them good information. So before you hit like repost or reshare, make sure what you're reposting and resharing is accurate. Look to sources like the League of Women Voters, the Election Protection Coalition. Those are places where you can get accurate, nonpartisan information about voting and feel good resharing it.
Yeah. So, I think something like Citizens United has been one of the most consequential and corrosive decisions to our democracy. When it comes to voting rights, where essentially it's $1 equals one vote. At this moment, and right now we see billionaires like Elon Musk who are already pouring money into midterm election efforts. And so I want to ask you. I mean, there's so many folks who believe that voting just doesn't matter, right? Because ultimately, the rules of the game come down to the lyrics to the Wu-Tang song Cream, cash rules everything around me. Um, then, as opposed to this land being your land. And just so the listeners know, the Wu-Tang fan amongst us is Nora. I'm more of a jazz person. But anyway, I want to I want to ask you, Hannah, what's your pitch to voters who say that voting, doesn't really matter at this point anymore? We live in a kleptocracy, an oligarchy, and why do I need to get off of the couch and make my voice heard, so to speak?
Yeah. I deeply understand why a person might feel that way, really. The thing I'll say though is I don't think I have to make the pitch because I see people making the pitch for themselves. This fall, November of 2025, there was really high voter engagement. In some cases, record-breaking turnout, right? A public utility commission election in Georgia, right? I mean, what? People voted. They voted. This is the offest of off years. And yet, people voted. And I found that incredibly heartening and inspiring for the work that we do. If ever there was a call for an organization like mine, whose job is to remove barriers to the ballot for people all across this country, it is to see people wanting to vote. That said, I'll also answer your question maybe a little bit more directly. And this is one of the things I tell myself a lot, which is that people wouldn't be trying to take your vote away so hard if it actually did not matter. And we should
Mhm.
feel deeply, deeply inspired, maybe angry, right? Maybe it's the anger that fuels you. Maybe it's the inspiration that fuels you. Maybe it's the history of people who came before you that inspires you. But there is something that if there is someone is trying to take something away from you, you should fight as hard as you can to hold on to it. And your vote is the surest way that you can do that.
I wanna ask as a follow-up, and I I don't know how familiar this kind of practice that we have in Seattle is with you for
Mm.
you, but we have this democracy voucher program in Seattle that started about 10 years ago that allows everyday voters to not just have a vote every election cycle, but to actually have $100 in vouchers that they can give to their candidate of their choice. It's funded through public money, and in order to qualify for the voucher program, our candidates have to essentially sort of swear off big money, and big money donations in their races. Um, and so I guess I'm wondering, like, is there a way that we can think beyond just the voting as an act itself that empowers people, and to think about how we can sort of rebalance the game, if you will, and give voters power in other ways as well?
Some of the most exciting conversations I'm having right now are about how we think of voting as part of one piece of a broad, kind of holistic, civically engaged American. And I think that's really invigorating right now in this moment where, look, I would say that voting is the most deeply personal act of civic engagement that most of us are ever going to engage in. And also, I see how it is just one piece of being a fully engaged citizen. I think, for example, about people whose right to vote has been taken away because of a criminal conviction. Voting is not available to them in some cases. That's not true everywhere. There's a lot of factors that go into that, but it is certainly true for some people. And yet, those people can and should be fully engaged citizens, and we have to meet them where they're at. Also, we know that recidivism and voting can go hand in hand, which is to say, the rates of recidivism go down when people are able to be fully part of their community, right? So it is a deeply inspiring conversation, an exciting and dynamic one to think about in this moment where our democracy, as we conceived of it, and I will say we only in the loosest sense, because I think a lot of people very rightly have seen how this country has not had a fully realized democracy ever, or maybe at best only in the last 5 decades, right? But we are in a moment where we can be reimagining in truly creative and novel ways what it means to be a fully engaged citizen in this country. And so that that may be a way that Seattle is doing that, right? What are the other opportunities? How can we think about people coming into a fully engaged civic life? And voting is a part of that, but it's certainly not the only one. So I definitely encourage communities, cities, states to be experimenting in this moment. I think one thing we know for sure is that Americans are looking for something different. They sure are. And this is one part of that.
Yeah, you say Americans are looking for something different, and I myself have looked at other countries and sort of what they do in terms of ensuring that everybody has the right to vote. And in a place like Australia, everybody is forced to vote with compulsory voting, and they also open they also have their polls
Not
opened
sure
on.
that'll work here.
Well, yeah.
I'll just say,
Fair
not
enough,
even
but
a
the
real American.
the voting on Saturdays thing, though, I think it's something we could potentially take from Australia. And
And we
so
do, and we do. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and so my question for you is this: when you look at what some other countries are doing,
Yeah.
what things, if if it was possible to adopt, would you encourage that we adopt from places that are doing it better than us?
Oh, yeah. This is a great question. So I'll take a moment to plug that All Voting is Local has a pro voter agenda, which is exactly this, right? It's about imagining what voting could look like. Kind of if we started from scratch, right? What does the ideal American system of voting look like? And look, I will say we can look abroad. We can also look to different places within the US. I think this is still true. It certainly was until recently and may still be. North Dakota doesn't have voter registration. Okay, interesting. How does that work? There are states that have weeks of early voting. There are states that vote almost entirely by mail, right? There's a lot of different ways that we can vote. And look, I think in this country, I have recently come to appreciate the wisdom of our founding fathers in creating such a decentralized system of government, right? And one of the ways that we express that is through the systems of voting that we have that should be responsive to the communities where people live. If you live in a really rural place, if you're a Native American voter with a non-traditional mailing address, right? What are the options for you that may need to look different from a voter who lives in a big city with very reliable mail delivery and a standard USPS recognized mailing address, right? Different communities need different things. I will also say that in this moment, I have learned a lot about the fight against authoritarianism in the context of elections from other countries' fights for that. The way that other countries have seen democratic backsliding, including in the context of elections, efforts to manipulate the outcomes of elections in ways that are overt and profound and have held them off. And I think those lessons right now for us as a country, including some of what we've talked about today, right? That we need to be recognizing that this is a moment for a very big tent, a big and broad coalition of Americans who genuinely believe in voter access, no matter our political opinions, no matter who we want to win. We genuinely believe that our neighbors should have their voice heard. That is one of the lessons that I have drawn from countries that have found themselves in situations like ours, in a moment of real democratic, small d peril, and have come out of it. And so those absolutely are lessons that we need to be absorbing here in the United States right now.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I just want to say, Hannah, since you do live out in D.C., whenever you want to remind the Supreme Court that we're supposed to have a decentralized government, please do. And yeah, sorry.
Be sure to pass that message along.
We know you're in the know. You just, like, walk down the street and, like, tell your neighbors, right?
Yeah, pass it along.
Um, one of the kind of perennial conversations we're having on this podcast is just, the onslaught of everything and how we choose where to put our energy and attention.
Yeah.
And that looks different for every person. But for people who are really caring about the midterms and about protecting the vote in the midterms, where do you want them putting their time, their attention, their resources, their energies? I mean, is it looking like becoming a poll worker? Is it, making sure that you have your list of contacts ready to go of everyone and who you're going to call to make sure they voted? Like, where do you want people paying attention and
Yeah.
spending their somewhat limited energy these days?
I mean, you've a little bit done my job for me, Nora, but
Sorry.
the no be a poll worker. Truly, become a poll worker. This is a moment where we desperately need more people signing up to work our elections. And that's true for kind of long-term kind of professional positions within local government. As you may know, election officials are experiencing unprecedented levels of threat and harassment and are leaving the industry because it's just too much. And look, I can't blame them. And so we need people who can come in fresh, who can say, "Hey, I'm ready for this. I want this." But there's also just being a poll worker, which is a one-day gig or maybe a few days if you live in a place with early voting. You usually do get paid. I will say that, a little promotion, right? It's not a lot, but it's a little bit of something for your time. And it is a way to help your community vote. You're there to check people in, you're there to help them make sure they know where to go and put their ballot in the slot. You help them understand how the voting machine works. That is a way that you can serve your democracy. The second thing I'll say is that organizations like the ACLU, organizations like the League of Women Voters, organizations like Common Cause, organizations like the NAACP, right? These are membership based organizations that any one of us can join and through them become an advocate of the kind that we're talking about today. You want to go to your board of elections meeting and say, "Hey, we need this voting location. Hey, count these votes. Hey, we need an extra day of early voting." That is the way to do that. And so finding what organization is the right fit for you, find that. There's one out there for you. There's one out there for every one of us. Find that organization, sign up and become an advocate in your own community for your own community.
Yeah. Yeah. And as someone who's worked to, like, do weird things like ballot curing in elections, I think it also gives you such a respect for the process. Like,
Yes.
you see how the sausage is made, and you're like, "Oh, there are a lot of checks on this system. There are a lot of people who really care."
Who and that actually, that is such a lovely and important point that, on the topic of the threat environment in which election officials are working, some of that, maybe a lot of that, is attributable to the fact that we sometimes lose sight that government workers are also people. They are people. They send their kids to the same school you do. They worship at the same church that you worship at. They send their kids to soccer and you see them at the soccer game. They are people and they are people, just like you're saying, Nora, who are deeply invested in this process,
Yeah.
want it to work, take that responsibility seriously. And that's something that I really want people to remember. Yes, sometimes you get to the voting location, you got to wait in a long line. Yes, sometimes there's something with your ballot that does need to get cured or fixed. Maybe you forgot to sign the ballot envelope and someone's calling you and they're saying, "Hey, we want to make sure your ballot counts." That is a person who's invested in the process and in helping you make sure that your vote can count. And I think keeping that front and center is absolutely vital in this moment where we are too often in both micro and macro ways, interpersonally and big picture ways, losing sight of the things that make us common and that
Mhm.
give us a shared humanity.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. I do want to ask you, Nora and I, we were talking on an episode about how, as bad as things were in 2025, they didn't sort of end up reaching like the peak of what, of the worst we thought could have potentially happened. And so I guess I want to ask you, and I mean, in trying to sort of pull a strand of a silver lining in 2025, considering your work on voting rights, I mean, do you think, and I'm not at all, I don't want to sound like the worst is over and that we shouldn't still be diligent, but I do want to ask you, I mean, were you sort of pleasantly surprised is probably the wrong phrasing, but were you in many ways um, encouraged that things, that we didn't see sort of the worst of it, if you will, when it came to a rollback or an attack on voting rights that
Yeah.
as you've already cited, whether you're in a red or blue state or even purple state, right? Folks were willing to stand up for their rights to vote.
Yeah. So this is a really good question. How do we hold these two things at once? I'll say we don't know what's coming and we got to be vigilant, as you've said, but people got a lot of fight in them. And I see it in voting. But I also see it in a lot of other issues that have been, frankly, more front and center this year, right? Communities rallying to support and protect their neighbors, right? I mean, I live in Washington, D.C., where we've had a federal takeover for months now, and the community is united in our support for one another and our opposition to that. And I'm speaking here as a person, as a resident of this city. I see it in my own town. I see it in my own hometown. I'm from here. And this year has been brutal for so many communities, for colleagues, for partners. And yet, people have a lot of fight in them. They have a lot of pride. They have a deep respect for the community that they live in, for their friends and neighbors. People who do not think of themselves as political, seeing things happening around them and saying, "This is wrong. And I'm not going to allow it to happen here. And I'm going to support and protect the people who live here, my neighbors." And that doesn't in any way take away from the brutality that people are having to witness and face and feel. And yet, I share your view that Americans all across the country from all walks of life have demonstrated that they have each other's backs in a lot of really important ways. And that means we're ready for 2026, whatever it's going to bring. And we
Yeah,
can't control a lot of it, but we can control how we act. And a lot of people are making the right choices.
yeah. I was talking to an immigrants' right advocate for a story, and she was saying it's been slightly less horrific than I thought it was going to be. Which I don't know. I don't know if that's a bow of optimism, but it's it was better than she thought, I suppose. So anyhow,
Um, Speaking of optimism, I was thinking in the run up to this conversation, Hannah, you and I have been friends since freshman year of college. And I was thinking that the first federal election that you and I both voted in was Bush v. Gore, which of
Yeah.
course went to the Supreme Court.
Yeah.
Rough first election to vote in.
Yeah.
And you've basically been doing voting rights work since that election. And I mean, it's just hard to think about how many challenges there have been. I mean, I think this is work that would turn like even Pollyanna into a pessimist, and yet you are like one of the most optimistic people I know. Um, I I remember calling you after the last election, and you were like, "I'm great, I'm fine," and I was like, "Are you really?" I don't know. But like, but in all honesty, like, what is keeping you in this fight, and what sustains you? Of course, it's watching our neighbors stand up and fight, but what else is giving you, I don't know, fuel right now as we look
Yeah.
ahead?
Um, Part of it, probably a lot of it is, you know, seeing our staff, our organization just keep it going and they're just I mean, they they're like Teflon. They just power through, and it's incredible to see. As and the communities that they work in, it's the same. But I don't know. Maybe it's the sort of end of the year and starting 2026 and being a little bit kind of new year reflective. Um, but I think I take a little comfort from history. I come from an immigrant family. My grandparents emigrated here after World War II, as Nora knows, and they came from Ukraine, which is certainly seeing its share of troubles right now. Um, and I think this is true actually for a lot of people who are close in time in some way to a story of oppression, whether it's abroad or here domestically in the United States, people with an immigrant experience who left somewhere that was in turmoil. And, it gives you a sense and some perspective of the long arc of the moral universe. And I I take some comfort in that. Now that doesn't serve me every day. We lose some fights. You get a new big bad restriction on voting, you know, and it deflates you for a minute. And then you got to remember a lot of people have gotten deflated and just got right back up. And that is certainly very resonant for people who work on voting. I've been to Selma. I've spent time in the deep south, right? We got a lot of staff for whom those stories are deeply personal. That's their grandparents' story, right? That's their parents' story. So it grounds you in some perspective. But really, it's just the people. I mean, they just keep going. And no one, I will say, people should not have to be this resilient. They should not. It should not be this hard to be a person in America in 2025 or 2026. It should not. And I'm talking about voting, certainly, but I'm definitely not only talking about voting. I am talking about every aspect of our lives, right? Education, healthcare, affordability, dare I say it, right? But God, people are resilient. They just keep going. And that means I got to be resilient for them.
yeah, yeah. That reminded me so much of there's the movie with Will Smith called I Am Legend, and he's telling this apocryphal story of Bob Marley, and he says, Bob Marley was going to perform a peace concert, and he ended up, you know, there's an attempted assassination of his life the day
Oh, no.
before, and so and he's in the hospital. and the doctor is like, you're not supposed to be, you need to stay here. And he's like, no, I got to go perform at the peace concert. And he goes to the peace conference, the conference, concert the next day, and he's there with some of the assassins who tried to kill him, and he's raising their hands up, and they're like, why'd you decide to get out of the hospital bed and come? And he said, because the people who are making this world a worse place didn't take the day off today, so I'm not going
Mhm.
to either. Um, so, Hannah, I just want to say thank you so much for the work that you do. I know you're taking time off after this, but like the days that you are not off, I really appreciate that, and we continue to wish you fuel for this fight.
It
Thank
helps us
you.
all sleep better knowing that you're out there doing
Yes,
it.
yes.
Well, we really
Thanks,
appreciate
Hannah.
it. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on. This is
Yeah.
truly like such a pleasure. So much fun to be with my old friend and do this together. Thank you guys both.
Well, we feel lucky to have friends like you.
Awesome. Nora, I have to say you have the coolest friends, man. And I will tell you, as somebody who has been extremely, extremely concerned about, voting rights as it pertains not just to this upcoming election, but hell, just voting rights going forward. This was definitely a conversation I needed to hear, and I'm sure I'm in good company with a lot of our listeners.
Yeah, I think it's one of those conversations where it actually is reassuring to look the thing in the eye and see exactly what's up with voting in
Yes.
our country, and to know that there are lots and lots of very knowledgeable people like Hannah who are working their little bums off to protect it, for all of us, and doing the ground organizing, the ground game that it really takes to protect it. So I think
Absolutely.
this conversation made me feel like we might actually get to an election this year, which is better than where I started.
All right. Well, again, as we have already stated on the show, knock on wood, just in case. But that being said, and I know you had to do some deep excavation this week to find your 8 ounces of joy, Nora, but would you care to share your 8 ounces of joy with the audience?
Sure, yeah, it was definitely an excavation week. It was also a week of restarting teaching and classes for me, but one of my small pieces of joy this week is that I'm teaching a brand new class that I've been kind of dreaming up for a bunch of years now and finally get to teach. And it's a class for first year undergraduates on collective care in times of crisis. And I
Mm.
just feel like there's these moments sometimes when you're teaching where you actually get to teach people the skills they need to like survive in our world and do it collectively and joyfully. And this class is filling me with a bit of hope,
Mm.
and especially to watch young people recognize how important this stuff is and recognize that they are going to build the world that they want to live in is pretty cool.
Yeah, I can imagine that there are a ton of people asking to audit that class right now, and just in terms of just on the description alone. Well, at least you aren't teaching Plato in the class, so I guess
Dude,
that would be
yeah.
banned, as it has been in Texas. But anyway, that's a story for another day. Well, I will share my 8 ounces, Nora, and it's unfortunate that the 8 ounces come from what was a horrific tragedy in Minneapolis. As I'm sure most of our listeners know by now,
Yeah.
um, an ICE agent shot and killed a 37-year-old woman in uh, Minneapolis. The Department of Homeland Security um, tried to defend the agent by saying, that it was quote unquote domestic terrorism. However, unsurprisingly enough, video of the shooting show that was like actually complete bullshit, which is a word we'll come back to. The woman was sitting in her car. Officers swarmed the vehicle. One of them, I guess, told her to get out. Um, that being said, when the officer tried to open up the door, the car just rolled back slowly. And I want to emphasize slowly. There's no flooring it, no Fast and Furious, nothing like that. Um, and then when one of the agents was standing near the front of the car, he pulled out a gun and fired 4 shots into the vehicle. It's only after she was shot, that the car accelerated and crashed.
Mm.
And so again, the Department of Homeland Security tried to, claim that this was, some form of domestic terrorism. And so I want to just give some kudos to Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who um, locally in Minneapolis is known as a centrist and a moderate, and somebody who typically is a counter to a lot of the progressive legislation that the city council attempts to pass. But that being said, um, at the press conference, um, after the 37-year-old shooting, he just straight up said very clearly and very bluntly that ICE needed to get the fuck out of Minnesota. And he also said that their explanation for what happened in the video was complete bullshit. And
Mhm.
I got to say, for somebody who complains often that our elected officials, uh, I'll just be honest with you, since I am somebody who identifies as being on the left, our you know Democratic elected officials don't typically, um, they're always sort of dancing around things, and when they just need to clearly call out things. It was
Mhm.
refreshing to hear and see Mayor Frey, not mince his words. And I do hope, that there are more elected officials that continue to do that. And also more elected officials that don't just, play act or present as fed up, but actually end up being fed up with all this just absurdity that is going on, you know, on our streets. And so, I think more and more people need to speak up. We've talked about it before about how if more people spoke up, it would be easier for people to speak up. So,
Yeah.
um, joy is maybe not quite the right word, but I will say that I was glad to see Mayor Frey say what he said, and I can only hope that as these absurdities continue to get called out for what they are, more and more people continue to do them. So
Yeah.
anyway,
And our
um,
condolences to everyone in Minnesota, and may she rest in power.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, with that being said, I know that's quite the note to leave our listeners signed off on, but unfortunately, we got time constraints, folks.
Yeah.
So,
Well, folks, we are proud to say that the only thing we've invaded this week is your airwaves and maybe your earbuds. If you like the way we do things here, which is to say, hosting rich conversations like this one and not violating international criminal law, please send us some support in the form of a donation or a subscription at inthemeanwhilepodcast.com. We promise we are much cheaper and more satisfying than a forever war.
for sure. And huge thanks to today's guest, Hannah Freed, and kudos to the whole team at All Voting is Local. Make sure to check out their work and find some ways to ensure your vote is counted and protected this year. As always, we want to thank our producer, Jessica Partnow, who makes sense of our anxiety driven ramblings each week, and also Aha Maluo for the music on our show.
You can catch In the Meanwhile on KVRU Wednesdays at 5 or listen to full episodes wherever you get your podcasts. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, basically wherever you doom scroll.
New episodes drop every Friday. And until then, folks, we'll see you in the meanwhile.